Okay, good evening, everybody. We're ready to make a start to delve into the next chapter of Tanya. This evening we're going to look into chapter 29 in our quest for happiness, the battle to conquer feeling down. And in chapter 9 we're going to deal with a very powerful question, and that is, how do you open a blocked heart? As discussed in the chapters previously, the emotion that we call sadness has many guises and many levels. There are healthy sadnesses and unhealthy ones. There's types of sadness that we can utilize, that are good, that can be productive, and there is sadness that needs to be stayed away from, avoided, and completely obliterated. There are different layers and levels when we use the word sadness, and the one that we've looked at previously is the sadness that comes as a result of bad things that happen in our lifetime and we feel down about it, or things that we ourselves have done wrong that we feel guilty and wrong about. If you're feeling something, that is sadness, but that's already not so bad because you're feeling something. And as long as you're in the world of feeling, that's already something good. There's a worse sadness than that, and that is a non-feeling. It's where we slip into a state of numbness where we actually don't react to the world around us. Our heart has become like stone. This is a bigger problem, a serious problem, and we're going to look at some strategies of how to deal with this level of sadness, the sadness where your heart has become like stone. This is the theme of chapter 29. So, to get into that, we're going to discuss a different topic. When is it in life that people find faith? Those who search for faith, each person has their particular journey, the particular path, and many people have a certain time, a moment, where they find their faith. That, not that they were necessarily a disbeliever before that, but faith was not a big part of their life. It wasn't a major factor in their daily activities. They may or may not have believed in God. If you would have asked them, do you believe in God? They probably would have given the Jewish answer, which is, yeah, I mean, maybe, sort of, could be, why not? I've never really thought about it too much. I mean, probably. Vague answers. You couldn't really press them on their faith. But then a certain point in their life, something changes, and faith becomes real for them. It becomes a defining factor. It becomes a motivation in their life. When is it that people find faith? What moments do people find faith in your experience, yourselves or around you?
When there's crisis.
Crisis. When there's crisis. Yeah. When there's a crisis.
Ill health.
Like ill health.
Tragedy.
Yeah, a tragedy.
Life-changing experiences like tragedy, but even the birth of a child,
Mm-hmm.
so a new person into the world can be a crisis.
The crisis element of the birth in a child.
Well, the whole change of
The change.
responsibility.
Right. So birth of a child can bring about huge changes, and that could bring about faith. So crisis, tragedy, illness, blessings. A big thing, a big life change such as having a child. Any other?
Perhaps when you feel you've lost control, that you can't manage yourself, you need a higher power to help.
Right. So you've lost control. You need a higher power. Then you turn to God. That's when you find faith.
In my case, totally different. It's when I realized that for 4 years I was in very
Dangerous situation. I've never been harmed. I thought, I am being looked after.
So a sudden realization that even though you should have been harmed, you weren't. Doesn't make sense. There must be some higher explanation. Somebody's looking after me. Mm-hmm.
I think maturity. I think as people mature, they become more open to it and be more connected to their religion and faith.
Mm-hmm. So as you get older, you just experience more of life. So then you become more open to stuff that maybe in an earlier time in your life you weren't open to. Mm-hmm. So, is there a common denominator here of all the catalysts of faith that we've mentioned here? Is there any common denominator that we could identify? Change. Change, a significant event, a change, a corner, a turn, something, a twist in our lives that has brought about faith. Why? Why should that bring about faith? Why should these events, positive or negative, difficult, amazing, why should that bring faith of all things? Why should that be the result? Why shouldn't it bring about an increase in playing tennis, for example? Why should faith be the reaction? Why shouldn't it be, I'm going through a difficult time in my life, I need to take up tennis? Why is it I need to start praying or connecting to God? Why is that the reaction in those circumstances?
Maybe you feel vulnerable. You need some security. Maybe that's the link.
Yep.
And the
In a state of vulnerability, you need something secure. God is security, the ultimate security. And when you feel vulnerable, you need that. You turn to that.
To find some meaning in what is happening around you and how that relates to your life onwards.
Mm-hmm.
And the realization that there's something greater than you.
Yeah, something bigger than you. And that happens at those times when you're searching. So the implication, what it sounds like, is that it's not that you were against faith until now, but there was something not allowing it to come out. And now, as a result of this change in your life, as a result of the vulnerability you feel, you're at a loss, you're confused, you're in awe, you're humbled, and at this time you are open to faith that perhaps you weren't before. We're not here talking, no one, by the way, has said that faith comes from a convincing argument. That somebody came to you and said, I bet I can prove to you that God exists, and it was so convincing that you started having faith. No one mentioned that. I mean, there are people who start believing because they read a book or they heard a lecture, but that's not as common. It's not so usual that from reading or hearing an idea we gain faith. It may be opened us up, it may be made us think, but the turnaround seems to happen through something much more dramatic, much more hitting home. And so it seems that we need something almost to happen to us for faith to blossom, for it to come out. So the question is, what was stopping it before? If you're a person, a reasonable person, so do you need a tragedy to happen to you, God forbid, to make you realize that there's a God? Do you need something amazing to happen to you personally to make you realize that there's something bigger out there? Until then, were you so blind that you didn't notice that these things do happen and there must be some bigger plan, some bigger thing that's going on? Why did it have to happen to you? Why did we wait till then? What was stopping us from having faith until this event happened? Distracted by? By life, by stuff. We're just involved in the everyday. And if somebody would have come up to us and said, in our distraction, in our busyness, I want to tell you my story, and they tell you their epiphany that they had after going through a difficulty, would that work? Would it wake you up? Is that enough? Probably not. Because that's them.
And you can't relate to it.
Yeah, can't relate to it, even if you can relate to it.
So why should I change what I'm doing?
Right. So it's a bit unreasonable, right? It's a bit silly almost. I mean, we don't only start wearing a seatbelt after we ourselves have been involved in a terrible accident. You know, that like we understand, we get it, that accidents happen on the road, seatbelts save lives, so you wear a seatbelt. Most of us will do that without having to go through it ourselves. But faith not. Faith is not enough to let other people's tragedies work on us. We have to have it ourselves. We have to wait till it happens to me. What's wrong with us? Why can't we just get it that there is a bigger picture happening? So aren't we better off having the faith before things happen rather than afterwards? there must be something that is not letting it happen. There's something in us that's not allowing the faith to drop in, to fall through, for the penny to drop. There is a blockage. There's a blockage going on. And this is the topic of chapter 29, that the blockage we're talking about is the blockage of the heart. That the heart is blocked to not allow in the reality that we know in our mind, that we see it, but it doesn't affect us. We don't become emotionally moved by it because there's something in the way. Let's have a look at how Rabbi Shneur Zalman describes this blockage of the heart. In chapter 29, the Alter Rebbe Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, another challenge that Beinonim, which are the strugglers, which describes all of us, the Beinonim must struggle with, is that occasionally and even frequently they experience a numbness of the heart, which becomes like stone, and the person is unable, try as he might, to open his heart to prayer. Also at times he's unable to wage war against the evil impulse so as to sanctify himself in the things that are permissible because of the heaviness that is in his heart. What he's describing here is what's called in Hebrew timtum halev, the blockage of the heart. And that is where, let's say you're in the struggle already. Let's say you're on a spiritual path, but sometimes our ability to connect to spiritual things, our ability to connect to God, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't switch on. It just doesn't go. That we don't feel able to pray, to connect, to elevate, to see the bigger picture. It just doesn't go anywhere. And it's not because we don't know. We do know. It's not because we don't have the information. We have the information. It's that our heart has become numb, lifeless, frozen, like stone. It's just motionless. There's no life there. And so even what you know is true in your mind is not going to drip down into the heart because the heart is not a receptacle for it. It's not open to it. It's not listening. And so doesn't matter how hard you try at that time, you may want to connect, you may want to find truth, you may want to elevate yourself and live a bit of a higher life. It just doesn't work because you're blocked. Your heart is blocked. And this, says Rabbi Shneur Zalman, happens to we Beinonim, we strugglers, occasionally or maybe even frequently. Beinoni, just to remind us, is the title given to those who are not completely wicked people, not totally disconnected, people who are trying to be good, but we're not saints, we're not perfect, we haven't made it yet, we're still in the struggle. And that, as we learned earlier, is where we all fall. All of us, none of us are perfect, we haven't conquered our inner demons, we've got a lot of stuff that we need to work on, but we're at least in the fight, we're at least doing our best, we're trying. That makes us a Beinoni, somebody who's in the middle, in between, not wicked, not a saint, but in between. A Beinoni is going to occasionally, at least, or maybe frequently, experience this blockage of the heart, a numbness of the heart, where nothing feels right. It's just, you're not inspired. You're flat as anything. And you wonder where the inspiration went. You remember that you had been inspired. There were times when you were in that mode, where you did feel the universe had come together and you knew what your life was all about and you're on a good path and there's a bit of momentum there and you're doing all the right things. And then suddenly it just goes away. You wake up one morning and it's just not there. And you might try to pray a little bit, study something that will inspire you, do a little bit of an inner meditation or something, and just doesn't go. It's like you run out of gas. It's just not happening. Completely flat. And at those times you feel maybe it was all a mirage, it was my imagination. Maybe I was never really into this in the first place, because where's it gone? It's just disappeared, completely flat. And you can't pray. You can't connect. You're just not in that mode. And furthermore, when you're in that state, you can't wage war against your evil impulse. The negative side, the selfish side, the uglier side of our personality, it's always there, it's always lurking, it's always waiting to pounce. And we can only combat it, we can only answer it if we're feeling alive, if we're driven, inspired and clear in our mission. When we're feeling this way, this flatness, then it's got no opposition. our evil impulse, our negative side, is going to take us over completely. Will dictate our every move because there's no one home, there's no one opposite, there's no opposition, because we're feeling so flat, so uninspired, so disconnected from our soul that we have no answer. When our evil impulse says, listen, life is short, just have fun. Why are you worried about prayer and meaning and purpose and ultimate goals and higher ideals? Like, just enjoy life already, like everybody else does. Why do you have to be so deep, so thinking, so philosophical? Just enjoy. Make the most of life as it is. Go after every urge, every pleasure. Follow your bliss. Don't worry about anything higher, moral, purposeful. That's the evil impulse that it's constantly saying that to us. Internal voices, external voices saying the same thing. What's our opposition to it? If you're not inspired, if you're not connected to your soul, so then you have no answer to that. You feel like to be spiritual is to be a weirdo, to be the odd one out, to be different to everyone. Just get with the program, be a part of this world. That's what our evil impulse is constantly saying to us. And if you're not driven, you've got no answer. And so to challenge your evil impulse, we said earlier, in a wrestle between two opponents, so it's not the stronger one that's going to win, it's the one that's more determined, the one that is more driven, the one that is positive, the one that believes they're going to win is going to win. And in our inner struggle, the same thing. If your divine soul, if the holier part of yourself is flat, is not reaching your heart, is not on fire, is not passionate, so then your other side is going to be passionate. Your animal side, your uglier side, your selfish, instinctive side is going to be very passionate and is going to win the day. You're not going to be able to conquer any of your inner challenges when you're in this state of numbness, when your heart is not open to spirituality. So we got to do something about this. We can't just stay in the state of uninspired for too long. We can't just remain on autopilot and go through the motions for very long, because our animalistic side is going to take over. So what do we need to do? We need to respond to it. So Rabbi Shneur Zalman offers a strategy. In this case, the advice given in the Holy Zohar is the following. The Zohar is the great work of Kabbalah, written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, whose anniversary of his passing we commemorate this week. On Wednesday night is Lag BaOmer, the day that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, passed away. And on that day he said that we should celebrate his passing, not mourn it, but celebrate it, because his soul was so powerful that it was beyond life of this world. And there are many, many very profound teachings in the Zohar. One of them is the following. It says the following in the Zohar, a direct translation. A wooden beam that will not catch fire should be splintered. A body which the light of the soul does not penetrate should be crushed. Nice? Do I have a volunteer? Who would like to try this? A wooden beam that will not catch fire should be splintered. A body which the light of the soul does not penetrate should be crushed. Okay, let's look into this a bit. This Wednesday night, when it's Lag BaOmer, the tradition is to light bonfires. All around the world, they'll be lighting fires. They do it here around Sydney as well. All communities around the world light a fire to honor the soul of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who passed away on that day. Just like on a regular person, when they pass away, their yortzeit, the anniversary of their passing, we light a candle to commemorate the soul, the light that they brought into the world. For Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, a candle is not enough. For him, you need a bonfire, because his soul was so powerful, so illuminating. In fact, the word Zohar, the work that he wrote, Zohar means the book of illumination, of splendor. So for his soul, you need a bonfire. Now, anyone who has been involved in lighting a bonfire knows that it's not as simple as it looks. People think that a bonfire is, you get wood, you light it, and you got a bonfire. It's not so simple. You have to know how to light the bonfire to get it on fire. Not every piece of wood goes alight. You can't just put a match to a piece of wood and it becomes a fire. It doesn't work that way. If you try that, what you find is you go through a lot of matches and the wood just very stubbornly sits there and just doesn't go on fire, and you're not sure what's going on. So if you have got wood that you want to set alight, you need to have the right type of wood. Now, of course, today we have all types of tricks of fire starters and these type of things. But if you've got a log that you want to burn and it's not catching a light, Why is it not catching a light? What's stopping it? What is preventing it from going on fire? The wood. But what about the wood? The wood is what we want to light up. Why is it not lighting up? Wood lights. That's the fuel. Quality of the wood. It's too bad, too good. It's could be wet. That'll be a problem. But it's completely dry. I've got a nice dry log here. I kept it in all year till Lag BaOmer. If it's too dense, if it's too thick, you've got a huge log. You thought this was brilliant. I want a big fire, so I've got a big log. I don't want a little fire. I want a big bonfire for Rabbi Shimon. So you've got all these big logs, and you're trying to light them. They don't light because they're too dense.
Flame's going to match the wood.
So if you've got a huge flame already, so then a big log might light. But when you're trying to light the fire, so a huge thick log is just not going to light up. But you're a chacham, you were so clever that you only got big thick logs because you wanted your big fire. You don't have any little twigs to start it off. If you had some small twigs, you could start off the fire. A few newspapers, some cardboard, something light. But you only have big thick logs. So what is the solution to start your fire? You gotta do what the Zohar says. You gotta splinter it. You gotta chop up the log that you're trying to burn because it's too thick. It's got too much of a presence. It's too full to catch on. It's too dense. If you splinter it into smaller pieces, then those smaller pieces will catch on and you'll have the same amount of wood, but they'll catch on bit by bit and the fire will actually start and you'll have your bonfire. That's what you need to do to start your fire. Now the Zohar is not here to tell us how to start a bonfire. It's using that as a metaphor for a body which the light of the soul does not penetrate. What if you've got the same problem internally? You've got a soul that your soul is on fire, your soul is holy, your soul knows where the action is. Your soul has got it all clear, your soul is connected to God. But you're not a soul, you're a soul in a body. If you were just a soul floating, then you would know what the truth is. The problem is you're a soul in a body. And soul in a body means I'm living my life on a daily basis down here in this physical world in my body. So to be inspired, to live inspired, doesn't mean my soul is inspired. It means my soul has inspired, ignited, lit up my body. My down here person has to be inspired. My soul's always inspired, but that doesn't mean me because I am a soul and a body. And so until my body, meaning my physical self, my present human self, until that is on fire, until that is inspired by my soul, so then I'm actually not inspired. This is an important point, that because we're a soul and a body, so our soul knows truth, but our body doesn't. Our body sees the physical reality. Our soul sees the divine reality. Our eyes, physical eyes, can only see the concrete here and now, what's in front of us. So the physical world we chase after. We know its pleasures. They're familiar to us. They're in front of our eyes. Spiritual pleasures, spiritual truth, holiness, goodness, morality, that stuff is what the soul knows. Until the soul convinces the body that what's really good is spirituality, what's really good is holiness, the physical pleasures are only temporary, but it's the soul pleasures of goodness that are actually for real. Until the soul can inspire the body, we are not going to live a meaningful life. Until the soul's message reaches our body, we get it in our heads and our heart, down here, so it's not going to mean anything that our soul is connected. Our body has to be connected. And what happens if it's not? What if you have a body that the light of the soul does not penetrate? It doesn't get through. It doesn't make it. So what should you do? Says the Zohar, well, it's the same as the log that doesn't get lit. You have to crush it. Meaning? What does that mean? To crush it? Like, really? That's what we're supposed to do to our body? Take your body and what? Throw a brick on your toe? Lie in front of a steamroller? What are we supposed to do? To crush the body? Now, to be clear, there have been schools of mysticism, even within Judaism, that believed that self-flagellation, punishing the body, was a way to reveal the soul. That by taking the body and lowering it, punishing it, your soul would shine through. And if you think about it, you can understand where the logic comes from in such a thing. If we're a soul and a body, soul is holy, body is not. So we've got to get rid of body as much as possible for the soul to shine through. And so dying is one way of doing that. That's a great way to get rid of body. Soul leaves body entirely and then you're holy. But in the meantime, we're in this world. So to not die, but to harm the body, hurt the body, that people believed was a way of letting the soul shine through. Now, in Jewish mysticism, this was always a fringe idea. There were certain times in history where it was believed, but mainstream mysticism rejected that idea. Particularly from the times of the Baal Shem Tov, the Hasidic movement 300 years ago completely rejected the idea that hurting the body is good for the soul. In fact, the opposite. The Hasidic masters said that the body is the vehicle of the soul. A small hole in the body is a big hole in the soul, meaning if your body is not functioning well, if you're not healthy, if you're not looking after your body, so then your soul cannot express itself, because the soul needs the body in this world to express itself. In the other world, you don't need the body, but in this world you do. And so the body has to come along on the journey. Therefore, this statement of the Zohar seems very weird, to say that the light of the soul, to penetrate the body, you need to crush the body. If there's resistance from the body, you need to crush it. It can't be taken in a literal sense that you need to hurt your body in order for your soul to come out. The metaphor of the log being chopped and splintered by an axe in order for the light of the fire to catch onto it cannot then be translated literally that you've got to get an axe, you've got to get a knife and hurt yourself. I mean, there were people who did this. They would cover themselves in honey and roll on a beehive to get stung, or cover themselves in sugar and roll around an ant mound to be bitten by the ants, to hurt themselves, or go and lie in the snow to freeze themselves and hurt their body. Okay, whatever you want to do, but that's not the way. That's hurting the body. Such a person is not going to function. You're not going to fulfill your mission that way. So crushing the body here to let the light of the soul shine into it, it must mean something else. It can't mean self-flagellation, hurting yourself, self-harm. That's not good. That's bad stuff. So what does it mean? Explains Rabbi Shneur Zalman. This means that the light of the soul and of the intellect does not illuminate to such an extent as to prevail over the coarseness of the body. For although you understand and contemplate in your mind the greatness of God, this is not implanted in your mind to a degree that would enable you to prevail over the coarseness of your heart because of its crassness. The cause being the arrogance of the klippa, the power of evil, which exalts itself above the light of the holiness of the divine soul, obscuring and darkening its light. In these words, Rabbi Shneur Zalman explains what the Zohar is talking about here, a body that doesn't let the light of the soul catch onto it. We're not talking here about the physicality of the body. We're talking about your personality, your human presence. We're not talking about that the soul is not lit up in your toes, and so your toes need to be crushed. We're saying that your body here is talking about your human personality. That you've got your soul, your higher self, your spiritual side, then you've got your everyday normal self, your human self, your opinions, your passions, your excitement, what you're into and what you're not into. So the light of the soul illuminating the body means the clarity that you have in your mind when you know what's right, when you know where you should be going, where you know what's right and wrong and you know where your mission is. That's in your mind. You've got it really clear in your mind. If somebody would ask you to write an essay, what is the purpose of life? You'd be pretty good at that. And you'd be able to quite clearly say the purpose of life is to bring goodness into the world, to transform the darkness of the world into light, to bring holiness and goodness to the world around me. You could use all fantastic terms to explain what your mission is in life. That's in your mind, but it hasn't penetrated you enough. It's not so embedded in your mind that it can go down to your heart and make you feel a passion to do it. You're not moving on it. You're not actually motivated to do it, even though you know what it is in your mind. And that's because your heart is blocked. Your heart is the thick log that the fire is not catching onto. you're very passionate about certain things, but just not spiritual things. Your heart can get very excited about material pursuits, about physical pleasures, that you can be into and passionate about. But when it comes to doing the right thing, then you equivocate a bit on that one. You know in your mind what you're supposed to do, but you're not so passionate that you can do it. It doesn't translate to the heart. This is what we're talking about here, where the light of the soul is not igniting the body. Not the physical body, we're talking about your personality, which is more in the heart. As we studied earlier in the earlier chapters of Tanya, the two souls that the entire Tanya is based on, the divine soul, our higher self, and the animal soul, our lower instinctive self, their headquarters are in the brain and in the heart respectively. The divine soul's primary headquarters, it's planted in the brain, in our ability to be aware of something outside of us. Our animal soul is primarily centered in the heart, our feelings of what we are, our self-feelings. Not that that the divine soul doesn't have emotion, or that the animal soul doesn't have intellect. They do. But where their seat is in the head and in the heart, which means to know what's right, to be in touch with our soul on the mind level, is not all that hard. Once you've got a good path, if you've got a good teacher, if you find the right book, you can study right and wrong. You can get it. It's available. Your mind can get it. The divine soul is centered in the mind and more accessible to the mind. For the heart, on the other hand, our heart is primarily where we feel what we want, what I want, what makes me feel good. That's what primarily our heart says. The mind can look at what is good, ultimate good, what is truth. The heart looks at what is my good, what's good for me, primarily. So to get the mind to communicate to the heart, to get to the divine soul's understanding of reality, to translate into a passion, a feeling, a motivation to live that way, there's a journey there. We're trying to get the divine soul to communicate with the animal soul there. That's not so simple. And that's where the blockage comes. That's where we can be blocked. Why are we blocked? He says here that we can't prevail. We're trying to prevail. The mind and its divine soul is trying to prevail over the coarseness of the heart because of its crassness. The cause being the arrogance of the klippa, which exalts itself above the light of the holiness of the divine soul, obscuring and darkening its light. Our heart, our personality, our inner animalistic, instinctive self has a certain crassness about it, a vulgarity about it. I don't mean vulgar, rude and disgusting, but it's just not sensitive to a higher reality. That the taste of food we get, the taste of goodness, of holiness, we don't readily get that. That's an acquired taste. That takes time to really train yourself into. And so our heart has a certain selfishness, a certain arrogance to it that doesn't let these higher realities sink in. And that is where our heart becomes blocked. That we're not really open to the divine. We spoke a bit last week about how our animal soul resists spirituality. When you try to pray, your animalistic side tries to oppose it. There is a vested interest that we have to not really let our soul take over our lives. Because if we would really listen to our soul, if we would really listen to that divine part of ourselves, we might have to change a few things in our life. We might have to give up a few things that we are quite comfortable with and we like. We might actually have to make some real shifts and changes in our patterns and in our habits and what we do. And that's not comfortable for us because we're quite content living as things are. We know that we've got to change, but as long as the change doesn't actually inconvenience me too much, I'm willing to change. So if the change means moving house to a different house, okay, I can handle that. But if it means changing my character, if it means changing my habits, if it means controlling myself, saying no to myself, that's much harder. It's much easier to call a removalist and a real estate agent than to make one small change in my inner life, inconvenience myself in that way. And so therefore our animal soul is very resistant to change. We want to just stay as we are. And therefore our heart closes itself off from being inspired. It's weird. On the one hand, we want inspiration, we want direction, we want to be motivated to do the right thing, and at the very same time, we don't want it. We actually don't want to let it happen. We don't want to be moved. We don't want to have to change. It's not because we're crazy, and it's not because we're hypocritical. Maybe you are, but this is not because of that. It's because we have two souls. We have a divine soul and an animal soul. The divine soul sees truth and just wants to live by it. The animal soul just wants to be left alone. Just leave me alone to look after my own pleasures, to just indulge myself. It doesn't want to move. And so, therefore, we have inside us this crazy clash going on. Getting a taste of truth, we see it in our mind, but our heart rejects it. It doesn't let it sink in, because that means I'm going to have to actually change. I'm going to have to do something about this, and I don't want to do anything. That's the problem. That's the log that the fire doesn't catch onto. You've got a fire in your soul, but your heart is blocked and not getting inspired by it. It's not being translated. It's not coming down. It's not happening. So what do we need to do? What do we need to do? So what do we do with the log? We splintered it. So what does the Zohar say we need to do with the resistance that we have to the fire of our soul? We need to crush it. Which means, therefore, you must crush it and cast it down to the ground. Because we're not talking about our bodies now, in the physical bodies, we're talking about our heart and its selfish drives. We're talking about our animal soul. So what does crushing it mean? It means set aside appointed times for humbling yourself and looking at your own lowliness. As is written in the book of Psalms, when the heart is broken, the evil spirit is broken. Meaning, as we saw in two or so chapters ago, there is a certain time that is appropriate for looking at yourself, at your lowliness, and getting upset about it. It is sometimes an appropriate thing to do. Remember, Rabbi Shneur Zalman said earlier, this has to be a controlled exercise. You can't all day think about how lowly you are. That is your animal soul trying to make you feel miserable and then not fight. You have to set aside certain times. Maybe it's 5 minutes a day, maybe it's once a week, where in a controlled, pre-scheduled, preordained moment, you sit down and say, I'm going to look at my ugliness now. I'm going to actually look at my personal weaknesses and be upset about it. I'm going to humble myself. Instead of walking around arrogant, as I usually do, saying, I'm fine, I'm actually pretty good, I'm actually doing great. That's fine for the rest of the day, because that's got to get you through the day. But there's a certain moment when you have to say, as fine as everything is, but I've got certain issues that I have not fixed. I've got weaknesses that I need to work on. And I need to have certain times when I look at that and I actually crush myself to feel bad about it, to feel bad about my imperfections, my weaknesses. Why? Because when the heart is broken, the evil spirit is broken. This is the verse in Tehillim. Lev nishba ruach nishbara. That when the heart is broken, the spirit of evil gets broken as well. We're going to have to look into this. Yeah, you had a question?
I was just going to say, there's a really great letter from Rashi to his son that is a fantastic thing to read. It takes about not even 5 minutes. That is about that, being able to humble yourself and see yourself in the world and, have an objective viewpoint on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I read a book that there's a tzaddik in Israel who said that anyone who ever came to visit him, that was the thing he said for them to read. They have to read that, and if they can read it, like you said, not every day, because depending on your mood, you might take it the wrong way. But to read it maybe a few times a week or something is very grounding.
I think you're referring to Igeres Ramban,
is it Ramban?
That Nachmanides wrote to his son, which is a short letter that demands from you to look at yourself and to recognize your loneliness. There are many great works of Jewish ethics that are a mirror to yourself, that make you look at yourself and say, where am I and where do I need to be? And so, yeah, these things they're like a medicine. That medicine often is bitter, doesn't taste good. And medicine is also not food. You can't eat medicine 3 times a day as your food. It has to be taken in measured doses at specific times in order to heal, not to be bitter. You don't have medicine for bitterness, you have it for the healing property that it has. So too, this idea of occasionally reading those type of works that hone in and magnify your weaknesses and make you face them and think about them, they are good in measured doses at certain times. And this is specifically good when you're feeling this numbness. When your heart is numb and not feeling anything, that's when you have to crush that numbness by feeling sadness. In the next few chapters, Rabbi Shneur Zalman is going to very cautiously guide us through how to utilize sadness as a positive thing. How to utilize this feeling of feeling your lowliness, but making that something that will lift you up. And you have to be very cautious with it, because it cannot be a self-bashing session. If it becomes that, then you're in the clutches of your animal soul. This is exactly what your animal soul wanted, to make you feel bad about yourself, so therefore you're useless. Then you're not going to be in the fight at all. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a very careful, appointed time to look at your moral failings and get upset about it. Actually be disappointed about it. And when your heart is broken, the evil spirit is broken. Now, let's continue and make sure we get exactly what he's talking about here. Let's digress for a moment. There was a great Rebbe known as the Kotzker Rebbe. Kotzk was a city in Poland. And the Kotzker Rabbi, Menachem Mendel of Kotz, this is not a picture of him, but he probably looked quite similar to this, a Polish Rabbi in the 1700s. And the Kotzker was a particularly sharp man. His teachings were very brief, often one-liners or little aphorisms that he would blurt out and his students would have to think about and live by. He demanded absolute truth and honesty with self, and he from his students and also from himself as well. His teachings are very, very powerful, and one of them he says the following idea. He says, "There's nothing as straight as a slanted ladder. There's nothing as black as white shrouds. And there's nothing as whole as a broken heart." Meaning, there's nothing as straight as a slanted ladder. What does that mean? Did you get that one? It's like opposite. Does it make sense? There's nothing as straight as a slanted ladder. Is that ladder straight? Is it slanted? So can it be straight and slanted?
Yeah.
Slanted means not straight, no?
Well, the ladder's straight, but it's at an angle. Slanted, but the actual ladder's straight, but it's just put on an angle.
So when you're trying to climb a ladder, you need the ladder to be straight to climb it. But a straight ladder has to be slanted. If that ladder was put straight up and down, you wouldn't climb it, you'd fall, right? That would be a useless ladder. For a ladder to be useful, it needs to be on a slant. So there's nothing as straight as a slanted ladder. This is a straight ladder because it's on a slant. The slantedness of a ladder makes it straight. Because if it would be straight, that wouldn't be straight. That would be crooked for a ladder. Right? When your mother told you stand up straight, she didn't mean to do that. That's what you were doing, and you had to stand up straight. Right? Stand up straight means being straight. But when your ladder has to be straight, make the ladder straight so I can climb it, it means straight up like that, but not straight up and down like your back is supposed to be, because that would not be straight. So for a ladder, slantedness is straight. Now he's not telling us this to give us tips as in our handiwork, but it's to introduce an idea. He says there's nothing as black as white shrouds. What does that mean? I've given you a hint there with the picture. that the Jewish tradition, were buried in white shrouds. So there's nothing as black as white shrouds. Blackness represents mourning, sadness. And so white shrouds, they're white, which indeed represents purity, but it's black, it's sad, it's mournful. So white shrouds, there's nothing as black as white shrouds. So you can have something that's pure white, but it's black. Because when you're talking about white shrouds, so that's blackness, that's sadness, that's mournful. And there's nothing as whole as a broken heart. How does that one work? There's nothing as whole as a broken heart. That it's full of depth when it's broken.
If something's broken, if it's cracked, there's the capacity to have light come through that crack.
Right.
Conceals you. It's all of you.
When you're brokenhearted, it's all of you. You're
Yes, the whole of you.
the whole of you are completely consumed by it. Mm-hmm.
Maybe emotion, it's your emotions. Your heart has been filled with emotion. It was heavy, like we've discussed. It's not broken. It's just this heavy, solid heart. Whereas when it's broken, you're actually feeling your emotions, and that's when you're alive.
Right.
And you feel it.
Right. So, well, if we, yeah.
It almost goes back to your first question. When do you find faith? When you have significant change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When some event happens, some significant event happens in your life.
Correct. So you need your heart to be broken, to be complete, to be whole. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe it's the fragmentation of little parts that are broken. When you put them together, it forms the whole.
So that's when it's not broken then. The broken.
But it's fragmented before it's broken,
Mm-hmm.
before it's whole.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe when it's broken,
It's slightly unblocked.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of, something has happened so significantly, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
emotionally within the heart, that whereby before it was kind of on a plane
Mm-hmm.
feel, the situation has created a change in the heart which has possibly made it unblocked.
Yep. Well, look, if we compare it to the previous things that he said, the ladder, we said, is it straight or is it slanted? Well, you can't look at it on a universal scale. You have to look at, what are we talking about? We're talking about a ladder. The purpose of a ladder is to climb up the wall. If that's the purpose of it, for it to be straight as a ladder, it has to be slanted. That is its straightness. Other things are not that way, but put it into context, that's the way it is. So you can't just use the word straight and slanted. You have to understand what you're talking about. You're talking about a ladder, so a slanted ladder is straight. When we're talking about shrouds, they're white shrouds, but that's black. Because we're talking about shrouds, burial shrouds. So there's a blackness to that. The color's white, but the mood is black. So the context makes the whiteness black. There's nothing as black as white shrouds. So as well with the heart, what is the heart? What's the function of the heart? What's its purpose? What's it there for? It's there to feel. That's what a heart is there, to feel. When do we feel? When the heart has been broken. As long as our heart is complete, is unbroken, unchallenged, hasn't been shaken up, so then it's actually not functioning yet as a heart should. It's self-contained, it's sealed, that's complete, untouched, but there's no feeling there. That's not the function of a heart. The breaking of a heart is breaking it in, is initiating it, is opening it up. Now you're feeling. Now the heart is doing something. And so it's often only when our heart has been broken that our heart actually starts to function. It's actually real, it's actually there. As long as it is intact, it's not feeling. A broken heart is not fun. We don't seek such a thing out. And when your heart has been broken, the pain of that can sometimes be so intense that we do everything we can to avoid that happening again. But sadly, what that means is that we then protect our heart, not allowing it to feel, because feeling might mean it's going to get broken. The risk of it getting it broken, we're so scared of that we seal ourselves off. We avoid people. We become numb. We become unfeeling. We don't want to get attached. We don't want to get close. We don't want to get hurt. But then your heart is not a heart. It's very complete, very, very intact, but that's not a heart. A complete heart is not a heart. A broken heart is a whole heart, because it's feeling, it's alive, it's there. So when the Zohar suggests that when the light of the soul is not catching on, you need to crush yourself to allow it to come in, Rabbi Shneur Zalman says what that means is you need a broken heart. A broken heart feels. And when you're feeling, you're alive, the fire of the soul can actually touch you. As long as you're not feeling, as long as your heart is complete, intact, sealed, so then you're quarantined away from any inspiration. You're sealed away from it. It'll bounce off your heart. You're not open to it. And the fire can't catch on. You can't get moving. You need a broken heart. And so therefore, we sometimes need to utilize the tool of sadness, of breaking our heart, to kickstart the feeling, to open ourselves up to a bit of feeling, a bit of inspiration. There is a use for feeling bad, for feeling sad, for feeling down. That brokenness can open your heart. And so a measured, calculated, controlled self-analysis where we look at our failings, at our lowliness, and we get upset about it, can be that opening, the breaking of the heart that allows our heart to be whole, to be feeling again. How do we do this? Rabbi Shneur Zalman gives us more instructions. How can you break your heart but not become miserable? Not fall into misery and sadness and self-dejection, but break your own heart, allow it to feel again, so you can actually kickstart inspiration, you can lift yourself up. How do you do that? He says an amazing idea here. As he quotes the Talmud, the rabbis in the Talmud taught, a person should always incite the good impulse against the evil impulse. As it is written, again in the book of Psalms, rage and sin not. This is a quote from the Talmud that says that you should actually incite your good side, your divine side, against your evil impulse. The divine soul should be incited. You should actually get it to fight, to attack, to actually actively attack your negative side. Based on the verse that says, rage and sin not. Rage means get angry and don't sin. Now that's a bit, again, another surprising statement. Rage, anger, that sounds very negative. Doesn't it lead to bad things? What's it talking about here? Rabbi Shneur Zalman illustrates it beautifully. He explains. That is to say, one must rage against the animal soul, which is your evil impulse, with stormy indignation in his mind, saying to it, you are evil and wicked, abominable, loathsome and disgraceful, with all the epithets by which our sages of blessed memory have rightly called it. How long will you conceal from me the light of the blessed Ein Sof, the Infinite One, which pervades all the worlds, including this place where I stand? It's going to continue, but Rabbi Shneur Zalman here is actually giving us a script. He's saying this is how you should address your own animal soul. Remember, we've got two parts to ourselves. We're these dichotomized beings. We've got our divine soul, which is holy, upright, good. We've got our animal soul, which is our ugly, selfish, instinctive, and evil side. The blockage is coming from that evil side. We want the divine soul and its light to shine into our animal soul, into our heart, inspire us. So we have to shake it out of its complacency. So rage and sin not. Incite your divine soul against your animal soul. This is what it means. You should address it. This is an internal dialogue. Monologue, really, where your divine soul turns to your animal soul and says, you evil, wicked, abominable, loathful. It's a whole list of epithets, of names that our sages in the Talmud say, this is us. Our animal soul is all these things. It's disgusting, evil, lowly. It's out to get us. It's the thing that ruins our lives. It makes us make these stupid decisions, hurt ourselves, hurt the people around us. It's really bad. And it's me. It's inside of me. So you face it and you get angry at it. You tell it off. And you say, you evil, wicked, abominable, loathsome, disgraceful thing. How long will you conceal from me the light of the blessed God? the infinite light, which pervades all the worlds, including this place. The truth is that God is everywhere, including right here. If I would just open my eyes and be open, I would feel God's closeness right now. I would feel totally uplifted. I would see the most amazing things right in front of my eyes. I would feel the connection with God. It's right there in front of me, but I've got this ugly animal soul that refuses to let me see that negates and contradicts the truth and stops me from seeing it. And so in the meantime, here I am living this very petty, self-absorbed life, complaining about every single thing that goes wrong, getting upset about anything that ever happens to me, getting offended by anything that anyone says, living this small, self-focused existence where everything is a kvetch and a complaint and a problem and an issue. All my happiness is blocked. Why? Because my animal soul doesn't let me see the truth, the divine truth that I'm surrounded by goodness, that I have a purpose in life, that I have so much to offer. Instead of thinking about what I can do, I'm thinking about what I can get. I'm so self-absorbed, all because of this animal soul denying the truth, that God is here giving you all the blessings for you to fulfill your mission, to live a beautiful, happy, uplifting life. So you've got to get annoyed at this. Imagine there was somebody standing next to you, holding you back from enjoying your life. After a while, you would get annoyed. So there's somebody inside you, which is your animal soul, stopping you from living this life of meaning, of purpose, and uplifting, happy life. You've got to get annoyed at it. Tell it off. How long are you going to continue doing this? You're talking to yourself here. But the self, the lower self, your higher self is speaking to your lower self. Your divine side is speaking to your animal side and getting angry and annoyed. How long are you going to do this? Continues. But you repulsive one, you deny the truth, which is plain to see by physical sight that all is truly nothing in the presence of God. There's nothing else, there's only godliness. All of the petty things that I run after, all the things that I think will bring me happiness, they're false, they're empty, it's not true. I'm not going to be happy because I live in that house or get this job or buy this boat. I'm going to be happy when I'm living a life of meaning, when I'm fulfilling my purpose. That's my happiness, it's obvious. Anyone knows that. Anyone knows that all the things I'm chasing are not going to bring me happiness. And yet my animal soul insists on denying the divine purpose in life and telling me that all you really need is a good meal and a holiday. And you'll feel much better. It's garbage, it's not true, it's false. It's not what life is about. Of course, everyone needs to eat and everyone needs a break but that's not the purpose of my life. And my animal soul keeps dragging me into this wheel of selfishness to completely stick in this mundane world and not go any higher. You've got to get annoyed at it. You've got to tell it off. How much longer are you going to deny the fact, deny truth, and not let me live according to my purpose? What does this achieve by this angry speech that you just gave? What does it do? In this way, you'll help your divine soul open the animal soul's eyes to the divine truth with a perceptive vision and not merely intellectual awareness. Meaning, by angrily telling off your animal soul, you'll allow the animal soul to open its eyes, to see reality, to see it from the divine soul's perspective, not just with intellectual awareness, not just in your mind, but to have perceptive vision, which means that you see it as reality. It becomes real to you. It sinks into your heart finally. You open up your heart. It cracks open. You've crushed the thickness of the heart by telling it off. And by telling it off, that opens your heart to actually have a feeling. You start to actually see things from the divine perspective. The inspiration comes back. It comes flooding into your heart. You see reality for what it is. The animal soul itself starts to see things from the divine soul's perspective. And an amazing line, says Rabbi Shneur Zalman, this is the very goal of all our spiritual efforts. This is what we're trying to do. This is exactly what we're trying to do. That our animal soul should get a bit inspired, should see it from the divine soul's perspective, should be a bit open. But the only way to open it up when you have this blockage is by telling it off, getting angry at it, getting upset and frustrated and expressing that internally in this internal monologue, this speech, this lecture that you give your animal soul. How is that actually going to help? Does telling off work? When we've been told off sometimes by parents, by teachers, by spouses. some of us by our kids as well. We get told off sometimes. Does it help? Is it effective? When someone says, "You naughty boy, how much longer are you going to do this? Why are you doing this? You've got to stop it." Does that help? Yes, absolutely it does. If it's well placed, if it's sincere, it absolutely does. You see, we think, particularly those of us who are parents, think that everything has to be explained. You have to sit down with the kid and explain why it's wrong and why you shouldn't be doing it, and convince the child that it's wrong, to see it your way. That might work sometimes with some children at some stages. But when a child is stubbornly just being naughty, not for any good reason, not because of a misunderstanding of how things should be, they know better and they're just being naughty, they have to be put in their place. And a firm telling off, not out of anger and frustration, but a firm, it's got to sound angry, it's got to sound serious, and say, "Enough, stop right now, I'm not tolerating it anymore, you cannot do this." When that's done properly, when it's done carefully, it is very effective. And we all remember it has happened to us, and we did listen to it. We were put in line, and we just needed to be put in line sometimes. That's exactly what we needed. We didn't need explanations. We didn't need to be sit down and going through all the facts and figures. We just need to be told, "It's wrong, stop it. Get out of your silly mindset and get with the program." We all need that sometimes, even as adults. We need to be put in our place sometimes, and it does work. When you're stuck, when you're not open, you need to be shaken up to open yourselves up. When your heart is blocked, it needs to be broken in order to feel again. When you're just stuck in the wrong way of thinking, we need a bit of a shake-up. And the shake-up allows us to get back in line. We calibrate ourselves again. And we sometimes need that. If you're blessed with an authority figure in your life, somebody who can put you into line, it's an amazing thing. It's a great thing. It's a great blessing. Those who don't have it are missing something. And sadly, in a lot of the even education systems these days, teachers are not given any authority. They're not allowed to ever speak like that. It's always, "What do you want?" And the child chooses and the child leads. And many people parent that way. The children are losing. They're not having the opportunity of being just told, "No, this is not what we do." And children need that, and adults need it as well. It actually does work. Internally, we need it as well. We need to have authority. Our divine soul have a bit of authority and tell off the animal soul sometimes. Stop it already. Enough. Stop being silly. Wake up already. Your whole life is moving along and you're just not doing the right thing. Get in line. This is the very goal of all our spiritual efforts. Interesting. Rabbi Shneur Zalman brings a proof for this from the Torah itself. Indeed, we find this explicitly stated in the Torah in connection with the spies who lacked faith in God's ability. This is a story in the book of Numbers where the Israelites traveling through the desert have reached the promised land almost. They're at the borders. And Moses sends spies to go into the land to check it out and see how we're going to conquer this land of Israel. 10 of the 12 spies come back with a negative report saying there's no way we can do it. It's going to be too hard. And in the wording they used, it indicates they didn't believe that God had the power to take them into the promised land. That's what they did. They didn't believe. They lacked faith in God's ability. But afterwards, they reversed themselves. These same spies reversed themselves and announced, "We'll already go up to the land. Yes, we change our mind." Whence did their faith in God's ability return to them? If at first they said, after spying the land, God's not going to be able to take us in, how come suddenly they changed their mind and said, "Yeah, it's okay, we will be able to go to the land"? What changed? Moses didn't show them any sign or wonder concerning this. He didn't do any miracles concerning it. He had only told them that the Lord was angry with them and had sworn not to allow them to enter the land. Why should this have influenced them if they didn't have faith in the first place? It's a very strange story. The way you look at it in the Torah, it was like this. The spies went into the land, came back and said, "No, it's too hard to conquer. Even God will not be able to organize us to enter the land of Israel. It's too difficult." And so Moses says, in the name of God, that God is furious at this lack of faith, and for that, you're just going to die in the desert. Your children will go into the land of Israel. You're not deserving to go in. And after they heard that, the spies said, "Actually, no, you're right. We can do it. We can do it." What happened? What changed? No miracle happened. There was no sign or wonder that happened that should change their minds. If they didn't have faith in the beginning, why did they have faith in the end? The answer is, the Israelites themselves are believers. The descendants of believers. It is just that the Sitra Achra, which is clothed within them, in its chutzpah and arrogance, stood up against the light of the holiness of their divine soul without sense or reason. Meaning, the spies have Jewish souls, and a Jewish soul believes. A Jewish soul just believes in God without any explanation, without any convincing, without any proof. Our natural state is faith. That's what we have. It's just that the Sitra Achra, the power of evil, our negative side, our animalistic side, it's within us, and it has a lot of chutzpah. Chutzpah is that untranslatable word that means that you just don't care. The facts may be this, but who cares? I'll go against the open reality, and I'll deny the most obvious truth. That's what chutzpah is. And our animal soul is the ultimate in chutzpah. It stood up against the light of holiness in their divine soul without any sense or reason. So for the spies to say, no, God can't take us into the land of Israel. What? God's not strong enough? He's not powerful enough? What a ridiculous thing to say. Where do they get it from? Their animal soul that has chutzpah and that can have a lack of faith. And that happens to all of us. That we think, there's no way that I'm going to find a job. God can't possibly find a job for me. And so we lose faith. What God can't find a job for you? It's too difficult for him? He doesn't have the power to do that? For me, God will never be able to find my soulmate for me. I'm destined to be just alone for... What? God, it's too hard for him? It's too difficult for him? That lack of faith is so irrational. There's no logical reason behind it whatsoever. But that's the chutzpah of the animal soul that just rejects truth, just goes the opposite against what the obvious truth is. Chutzpah just rejects it completely. So to the spies, it was simply the chutzpah of the animal soul that had a lack of faith, that presented this ridiculous stance that God is not strong enough. So therefore, as soon as the Lord became upset with them and thundered angrily, "How long shall I bear this evil congregation? Your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness." Their heart was humbled immediately and broken within them when they heard these stern words. As is written, and the people mourned greatly. They were just told off. All they needed was a telling off. And as soon as they heard the telling off, that God is furious. You don't have faith? How ridiculous. They were told off. They turned completely. They gave up their foolishness, their chutzpah was lost, and their faith returned. Consequently, the Sitra Achra, the power of evil, toppled from its dominion, from its chutzpah and arrogance, leaving the Israelites to their natural faith. Meaning, faith was not something they needed to get. They didn't need a sign, they didn't need a wonder, they didn't need a miracle. Faith is there already. It's just covered over by this chutzpah of the animal soul. When you smash it, break it, pierce through it, so then the faith comes back naturally because it's there. That's the default position is faith. Faith is not something you need to get from somewhere. Faith is there all along. It just needs to be returned, it needs to be allowed to flourish. The blockage is the animal soul. Its blockage is nonsensical, is irrational, is just chutzpah. So you need to smash it. Smashing it means telling it off. Stop already, enough. And when you say that firmly, it buckles, it crumbles, you crush it, and the fire is able to light. The inspiration can come back. It all returns, and everything's good again. You're connected, you're with it, you're up there, you're clear, you've got your clarity again. This answers the question that we discussed earlier, why faith comes as a result of change, of going through difficulties, of being shaken up. Because faith is not something you need to get from somewhere. Faith is the natural state of our soul. Our divine soul has faith. Lack of faith is merely the blockage that our animal soul covers over. When our heart is numb, is cold, is not open to faith, we don't feel the faith that we really have because our divine soul has the faith. Our divine soul knows the truth. And so sometimes it takes a shake-up, a shock, a shattering, a breakage, a breakdown, a broken heart. It takes that to just open our heart to receive the light that the divine soul already has, the faith that already exists. It just comes flowing back as soon as we're shaken up a little bit. So it's not what some people think, that faith is the crutch that you need when things are difficult. That because you're out of control, so you want the embracing arms of God to save you. So you suddenly have faith. No. The faith was always there. It's just this chutzpah we have to deny that faith. That's our animal soul. As soon as we're shaken up a bit, as soon as something crumbles, as soon as our arrogance, our chutzpah is shaken up, our complacency is lost, then the soul and its faith comes naturally back. It was always there. It was just waiting to return. And so what Rabbi Shneur Zalman here is saying is, we don't have to wait, God forbid, for a tragedy to happen. When we catch ourselves in the state of complacency, in the state of disconnect, of coldness, of numbness, that we're not inspired, that our faith is not shining through, we have to remember there's two sides here. There's our animal soul blocking what our divine soul knows. There's the fire that the divine soul already has, but then there's this big log that is just not catching a light, which is our animal soul. It's purely chutzpah, it's just covering over the truth that we know. And so don't just despair and say, well, I'm uninspired, it's all over, it was all a dream, I was never really inspired in the first place, it wasn't true. No. Stand up to your animal soul and say, enough already. What are you doing? Why are you blocking me from my true self? Why are you not allowing me to actualize what I can be? To connect to my truth, to myself, to my soul? Finish, stop already. Get angry at it, get upset at it, and that smashes through it. It then gets shaken into line and does the right thing. Opens itself up to truth. Our animal soul just needs to be told off, and then it can turn around. Sure.
It seems like this is the use of anger here.
Mm-hmm.
Like before
Correct.
it's sadness, but here it's anger in a good way.
Correct. Sadness and anger here, being used in a very measured and positive way. Absolutely. So he concludes. Let's just conclude. From this, every person in whose mind entered doubts in their faith can deduce that they are nothing more than empty words of the Sitra Achra, which raise itself against your soul. But the Jewish people have faith. In fact, your evil inclination itself entertains no doubts about faith, except that it has been given permission to confuse us with words of falsehood and deceit in order that we may acquire greater reward. Meaning, remember that this is all a big game, it's a setup. That when you have doubts in your faith, when you're not even sure, is this all real? Is there really a God? Is there really purpose in life? Or is it all just a big game? Is it a big joke? Then you have to remember that those doubts themselves are just your animal soul trying to knock you off, trying to be chutzpah and knock you off the path that you're supposed to be on. It's just trying to stop you from doing good. That's all it is. And so there's no logic, there's no rationale, there's no good argument there. It is just chutzpah. So you have faith. Faith is there. It's innate to our soul. Faith is always there. In fact, your animal soul also has faith, really. Because your animal soul is hired, is placed to test you, to try and challenge you, to try and drag you down, for you to overcome it. So your faith can come with a battle, so you can earn it and you get greater reward. Don't think that your animal soul doesn't have faith. It does too. It's just not allowed to let you on to that. So it has to pretend to be in opposition. It's not even real opposition. There's no true opposition to God in the world. It's just to give you greater reward, to make the achievement even better. So don't be fooled by it. Just tell it off. Say, stop already. I got your game. I've had enough of it. And get moving. Lift your soul up to fulfill its mission. So to summarize, what this chapter is telling us is that the biggest obstacle to faith is the blockage of the heart, the numbness of the heart, that our heart does not open itself up to the fire of the soul, and that is because it is the animal soul controlling the heart. So what do you need to do? You need to smash it. You need to crush it. How do you do that? By telling it off, by saying, you are chutzpahdik, you're out of line, and you've got to stop it right now. By belittling your animal soul, by telling it off and saying, you're disgusting, you're wrong. You're talking to yourself, but you're talking to that side of yourself. So you're not saying that you are disgusting. It's not that I'm disgusting, it's that I have an animal soul that is disgusting, that is wrong, that is chutzpahdik. And because Rabbi Shneur Zalman has set up throughout Tanya this idea of these two souls, so it means that you can be very honest about your lowliness, very honest about your mistakes, because that's your animal soul, it's not your divine soul. And so by beating up your animal soul, by telling it off, by being angry at it, you're not belittling yourself. On the contrary, you're expecting more from yourself. And that can be an uplifting thing. That is the story of the blockage of the heart and how to get rid of it. We'll conclude there. If there are any questions, welcome to take them. And then next week we'll continue. And God willing, next week we're going to see how to develop this humility, a healthy humility, a humility that will allow you to see your failings and not just not become sad, but actually make you happier. The humility that can lead to joy. That is God willing next week. Thank you. Thank you.